The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Detective Sarah Chen rewound the grainy security footage for the 100th time. The timestamp read November 15th, 1996, 3:47 p.m. On the screen, a 17-year-old girl with shoulder-length blonde hair walked past the orange Julius, her purple backpack bouncing with each step. She paused near the fountain, checked her watch, then continued toward the west exit of Brookfield Mall. That was the last time anyone saw Jessica Martinez alive. But here's what's haunting police departments across 3 states. That CCTV tape from 1996 wasn't the only footage. 28 years later, in a dusty evidence locker in Millfield, Ohio, investigators discovered something that should have been impossible. A second tape, recorded on the exact same day, at the exact same time, showing Jessica Martinez in a completely different mall, 300 miles away. Before we dive deeper into this mystery that's rewriting everything we thought we knew about missing persons cases, hit that subscribe button. Because what you're about to hear isn't just another cold case story. This is about how one piece of evidence has connected 17 unsolved disappearances across the Midwest, and why the FBI just reopened files they'd kept sealed for nearly 3 decades. The Brookfield Mall in November of 1996 was exactly what you'd expect from suburban America. Gap, Spencer's, a Radio Shack that still sold actual radios. Teenagers gathered near the arcade after school. Parents pushed strollers past window displays already decorated for Christmas, and security guards who knew everyone's name patrolled the corridors with the casual authority of small-town sheriffs. Jessica Martinez wasn't supposed to be there that Friday afternoon. She told her mother, Elena, that she was staying late for drama club rehearsal. The fall production of Our Town was opening the following week, and Jessica played Emily Webb, the young bride who dies tragically and returns as a ghost. The irony wouldn't be lost on investigators for years to come. Elena Martinez received the call at 6:23 p.m. Mrs. Henderson, the drama teacher, wanted to know why Jessica had missed such an important rehearsal. The entire cast had been waiting for her. Elena felt that familiar knot in her stomach, the one every parent knows when something shifts from inconvenience to genuine fear. By 7 p.m., Elena was driving through every parking lot in town. By 8 p.m., she was calling Jessica's friends. By 9 p.m., she was at the police station, filling out a missing persons report, while Officer Frank Delacroix assured her that most teenagers turn up within 24 hours, usually embarrassed and apologetic. Jessica Martinez never turned up. The investigation began predictably. Police canvassed the usual spots where teenagers gathered. They interviewed Jessica's friends, her boyfriend Marcus Chen, her teachers, even the manager at the movie theater where she worked weekends. Everyone described the same girl, responsible, ambitious, excited about her upcoming audition for the State University's theater program. Not the type to run away, and certainly not without telling her mother. The breakthrough came 3 days later when mall security handed over their surveillance tapes. The grainy black and white footage showed Jessica entering through the main entrance at 3:22 p.m., browsing the music store, buying a Coke at the food court, and making what appeared to be a phone call from the payphone near Sears. At 3:47 p.m., she walked toward the west exit, paused at the fountain, and vanished into the November afternoon. But here's where the story takes its first, impossible turn. The phone records showed no outgoing calls from that payphone at 3:47 p.m. In fact, according to the phone company's logs, that particular payphone had been out of order since October 23rd, nearly a month before Jessica's disappearance. Detective Ray Thompson, the lead investigator assigned to the case, spent weeks trying to resolve this discrepancy. He interviewed the mall maintenance crew, checked repair logs, even had technicians examine the payphone itself. Everything confirmed that the phone hadn't worked for weeks before Jessica's disappearance. Yet the surveillance footage clearly showed her making a call. her lips moving as she spoke to someone on the other end of a deadline. The case went cold by Christmas 1996. Without witnesses, without evidence of foul play, and with a teenager who had seemingly evaporated into thin air, there wasn't much for police to pursue. Jessica's missing persons poster joined dozens of others on bulletin boards across the county. Elena Martinez held vigils, organized search parties, and appeared on local news programs pleading for information. The community rallied around the family for a few months, then gradually moved on to other tragedies and concerns. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it's only beginning. Fast forward to March 2024. Detective Marcus Webb, ironically sharing a first name with Jessica's high school boyfriend, was conducting a routine evidence audit at the Millfield Police Department. The department was moving to a new facility, and decades of case files needed to be catalogued, digitized, or disposed of. Webb, a methodical investigator with 15 years of experience, had volunteered for the tedious work because he believed cold cases deserved better than a dumpster. In a box marked MISC 1996-1997, wedged between files for vandalism reports and noise complaints, Webb discovered something that made him stop cold. A VHS tape labeled Westfield Shopping Center, November 15, 1996, multiple angles. Westfield Shopping Center was in Columbus, Ohio, nearly 300 miles from Brookfield Mall. Webb's first instinct was that someone had misfiled evidence from a different case. But when he checked the case number written on the tape's label, it matched Jessica Martinez's missing person file. Curious, he located an old VHS player and popped in the tape. What he saw defied explanation. The timestamp read November 15th, 1996, 3:47 p.m. The same date, the same time as the Brookfield Mall footage. But this wasn't Brookfield Mall. This was Westfield Shopping Center, with its distinctive skylight, its marble floors, and its upscale boutiques that catered to Columbus's suburban elite. And walking past the Laura Ashley store, carrying the same purple backpack, wearing the same dark jeans and cream-colored sweater, was Jessica Martinez. Webb watched the footage 17 times before calling his supervisor. The girl on the tape wasn't just similar to Jessica Martinez. It was Jessica Martinez. Same height, same build, same distinctive way of tucking her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. But that was impossible. The two malls were a 4-hour drive apart, and according to every piece of evidence, Jessica had never been to Columbus in her life. The Westfield footage was even more disturbing than the original Brookfield tape. At 3:52 p.m., Jessica approached what appeared to be a security guard near the fountain. The man was tall, wearing a standard uniform, but his face was partially obscured by the camera angle. They spoke for approximately 90 seconds. Jessica appeared agitated, gesturing toward the mall's exits. The security guard placed his hand on her shoulder in what could have been a reassuring gesture, or a restraining one. At 3:54 p.m., Jessica Martinez walked with the security guard toward a service corridor marked Employees Only. She looked back once, directly at the camera, her expression unreadable. Then she disappeared through the door. She was never seen again. Webb's discovery sent shockwaves through multiple police departments. How could one girl appear on surveillance footage at two different locations, 300 miles apart, at the exact same time? The implications were staggering. Either the footage was doctored, which seemed unlikely given 1996 technology, or something far more sinister was at play. The FBI was contacted within 48 hours. Agent Diana Reeves, a specialist in unusual missing persons cases, flew to Ohio to examine the evidence personally. She brought with her a team of forensic video analysts, handwriting experts, and a consultant who'd spent 20 years studying what law enforcement euphemistically calls anomalous disappearances. The video analysis took 3 weeks. Every frame was digitally enhanced, every timestamp verified, every technical aspect scrutinized for signs of manipulation. The conclusion was unanimous. Both tapes were authentic. Neither had been doctored, spliced, or altered in any way. The equipment used to record them, the magnetic signatures on the tape itself, even the background noise and lighting conditions, all confirmed that both videos were genuine surveillance footage from November 15th, 1996. But Agent Reeves wasn't finished. She'd seen cases like this before, scattered across decades of FBI files, buried under classifications that few agents ever accessed. Missing persons who appeared on surveillance footage in multiple locations simultaneously. Witnesses who swore they'd seen the same individual in different cities on the same day. Cases that defied logical explanation and were quietly shelved when they proved impossible to solve. What happened next would change everything. Agent Reeves began pulling files that most FBI agents didn't even know existed. Files marked with innocuous codes like temporal anomaly reports and simultaneous location events. What she found was a pattern that stretched back decades, hidden in the bureaucratic maze of federal law enforcement. The first documented case was from 1973. A 16-year-old named Tommy Richardson disappeared from a shopping plaza in Akron, Ohio. 3 days later, his parents received a phone call from the Tucson Police Department. Tommy had been found wandering the desert, claiming he'd been at the shopping plaza just hours before. He had no memory of how he'd traveled 800 miles, no explanation for the 3 missing days, and no understanding of why his watch had stopped at exactly 4:17 p.m., the same time witnesses last saw him in Akron. In 1981, Mary Catherine Walsh vanished from a bus stop in Portland, Maine. Security cameras from a department store captured her entering the building at 2:33 p.m. But according to her sister's testimony, Mary Catherine had called her from a payphone in Denver at 2:35 p.m. that same day, crying and asking to be picked up from somewhere she couldn't identify. The cases kept coming. Disappearances that followed an impossible pattern. Multiple simultaneous sightings, surveillance footage from different states showing the same person at the same time. And always, the victims were teenagers between the ages of 14 and 18. By 1996, Agent Reeves discovered there had been 16 documented cases. Jessica Martinez was number 17. The breakthrough came when forensic analyst Dr. Patricia Hoffman noticed something everyone else had missed. In the enhanced Westfield footage, just before Jessica approached the security guard, she checked her watch. The timestamp on the surveillance video showed 3:52 p.m., but Jessica's watch, visible in the enhanced footage, showed 3:47 p.m., the exact same time she'd been recorded checking her watch at Brookfield Mall. Dr. Hoffman ran the same analysis on the original Brookfield footage. When Jessica paused at the fountain and checked her watch, the surveillance timestamp read 3:47 p.m., but her watch showed 3:52 p.m. The times were reversed, perfectly, impossibly reversed. Agent Reeves assembled a task force that included physicists from the Department of Energy, psychologists who specialized in dissociative disorders, and technology experts who understood the limitations of 1990s surveillance systems. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about missing persons investigations. The security guard from the Westfield footage was identified through employment records as David Kellerman, age 43, a former mall security supervisor who'd worked at shopping centers across the Midwest since 1989. But when investigators tried to locate Kellerman, they hit another wall. According to Social Security records, David Kellerman had died in a car accident in 1994, 2 years before the Jessica Martinez incident. The man on the surveillance footage was either an imposter using a dead man's identity, or something far more disturbing was happening in shopping malls across America. Detective Webb, meanwhile, had become obsessed with finding connections between the 17 cases. He created a map in his office, marking each disappearance with red pins connected by string. The pattern that emerged was unsettling. Every disappearance occurred at a shopping mall or shopping center. Every victim was a teenager. Every incident involved surveillance footage that captured impossible simultaneous events. But there was something else. Webb noticed that the shopping centres weren't random. They all shared certain architectural features: central fountains, skylights positioned at specific angles, and service corridors that led to areas not accessible to the general public. More importantly, they'd all been designed or renovated by the same architectural firm, Meridian Design Solutions, based in Chicago. Meridian Design Solutions had gone out of business in 1998, just 2 years after Jessica's disappearance. The company's records had been destroyed in what was officially ruled an accidental fire, but Webb found insurance documents that listed the firm's primary client as something called the Brookhaven Research Initiative. The Brookhaven Research Initiative didn't exist, not officially, but buried in congressional budget appropriations from the 1970s and 1980s, Webb found references to experimental retail environment studies funded through the Department of Commerce. The funding had been substantial, nearly $50 million over 15 years, all channeled through shell companies and research grants. Agent Reeves flew to Chicago to investigate the remains of Meridian Design Solutions. The building that had once housed the architectural firm was now a parking lot, but she managed to track down 3 former employees who'd worked there during the 1990s. The first 2 interviews yielded nothing useful. Standard architectural work, they claimed. Shopping mall designs, nothing unusual. But the third interview, with a former project manager named Stephen Cross, revealed something that made Agent Reeves's blood run cold. Cross, now in his 70s and suffering from early-stage dementia, initially claimed he couldn't remember much about his time at Meridian. But when Agent Reeves showed him photographs of the 17 shopping centers where teenagers had disappeared, his demeanor changed completely. "The mirrors," he whispered, his hands shaking as he studied the photos. "They made us install the mirrors in specific positions. Said it was for security, but the angles were all wrong for surveillance. The mirrors were supposed to create what they called temporal displacement zones. I thought it was nonsense, but they paid us triple our normal rate to follow their specifications exactly." Cross explained that each mall renovation had included the installation of precisely positioned mirrors and reflective surfaces. The specifications had come from researchers who claimed they were studying consumer behavior patterns, but the mirror placements made no sense from a retail perspective. They created blind spots instead of eliminating them, and they were positioned at angles that seemed designed to confuse rather than clarify. "There was something else," Cross continued, his voice barely audible. "They installed recording equipment that wasn't connected to the mall's security systems, hidden cameras that fed to a central location. We were told it was for market research, but the equipment was military grade, way beyond anything needed for studying shopping habits." Agent Reeves pressed for more details, but Cross's memory was fragmented. He mentioned a scientist named Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell who'd supervised the mirror installations. But when Reeves tried to locate Dr. Hartwell, she discovered that no one by that name had ever been employed by any research institution. The name was another dead end, another ghost in a case full of phantoms. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Detective Webb received a call from the current manager of Westfield Shopping Center. During routine maintenance work, construction crews had discovered a hidden room behind the service corridor where Jessica had last been seen. The room wasn't on any architectural plans, and it contained equipment that no one could identify. Webb and Agent Reeves flew to Columbus to examine the discovery. The hidden room was approximately 12 feet by 8 feet, with concrete walls and no windows. In the center of the room stood a chair surrounded by mirrors positioned at precise angles. The mirrors created an infinity effect, reflecting endlessly into each other, creating a visual tunnel that seemed to stretch into impossible depths. But the mirrors weren't the most disturbing discovery. On the walls were photographs, dozens of them, pictures of teenagers who'd gone missing over the past 3 decades. Jessica Martinez was there, along with Tommy Richardson, Mary Catherine Walsh, and 14 others. But there were more photographs, faces that didn't match any missing persons reports in the FBI database. At the bottom of each photograph was a date and a set of coordinates. The coordinates, when plotted on a map, corresponded to shopping centers across the United States. Many of the locations matched the 17 known disappearances, but others pointed to malls where no disappearances had been officially reported. The dates were even more unsettling. Some were in the past, corresponding to known disappearances, but others were in the future. Dates that hadn't yet occurred, suggesting that whoever had created this room was planning additional incidents. The most chilling photograph was pinned to the center of the wall. It showed a teenage girl who looked remarkably similar to Jessica Martinez, but the date at the bottom read December 15th, 2024, 8 months in the future. Below the date were coordinates that led to a shopping mall in Phoenix, Arizona. Agent Reeves stared at the photograph for nearly an hour, trying to process the implications. If the pattern held true, another teenager would disappear in Phoenix in 8 months, captured on surveillance footage that would show her in 2 places at once, vanishing into a service corridor with a security guard who might not even exist. The hidden room yielded one more piece of evidence that would haunt investigators for months to come. In a drawer beneath the chair, they found a journal written in Jessica Martinez's handwriting. The entries began on November 15th, 1996, the day she disappeared. The journal entries were impossible, yet there they were, written in Jessica's distinctive looped handwriting that her mother would recognize anywhere. The first entry was dated November 15th, 1996, 4:23 p.m., just 36 minutes after she'd vanished from the Westfield surveillance footage. I don't understand what's happening to me. One moment I was at the mall near home, the next I was somewhere else entirely. The security guard, Mr. Kellerman, he says I've been here for hours, but that can't be right. My watch stopped at 3:47, and it won't start again no matter how many times I wind it. Agent Reeves photographed every page before allowing the journal to be processed as evidence. The entries continued for what appeared to be several days, though Jessica's perception of time seemed increasingly distorted. November 16th, 1996. Mr. Kellerman brought me food today. He says I can't leave yet, that the process isn't complete. What process? I keep asking to call my mum, but he says the phones don't work properly here. When I look in the mirrors, sometimes I see myself at home, sitting in drama class or eating dinner with Mum. But when I reach toward the reflection, my hand just touches cold glass. November 18th, 1996. There are other kids here. I can hear them sometimes, but I can't see them. Tommy says he's been here since 1973. Mary Catherine arrived in 1981. They sound so young, but they talk about things that happened decades ago, like they just occurred yesterday. I'm scared I'm going crazy. Dr. Patricia Hoffman's handwriting analysis confirmed what everyone feared, but no one wanted to acknowledge. The journal was authentic. The ink showed appropriate aging for a document written in 1996. The paper matched stationery commonly available during that time period, and microscopic analysis revealed no signs of modern forgery techniques. But the implications were staggering. If the journal was genuine, it meant Jessica had somehow continued to exist after her disappearance, trapped in a space that seemed to operate outside normal time and physics. More troubling still, her references to other missing teenagers suggested they were all being held in the same impossible location. Detective Webb had been studying the architectural plans for Meridian Design Solutions when he noticed something that made his hands shake. Every mall designed by the firm contained what were labeled as utility corridors that didn't connect to any actual utilities. The corridors were positioned at the exact center of each structure, directly beneath the main fountains that had become focal points in every disappearance. Webb obtained ground-penetrating radar equipment and convinced mall management at 3 different locations to allow him to scan beneath their fountains. At Brookfield Mall, where Jessica had first been recorded, the radar revealed a hollow space approximately 20 feet below the foundation. The space was roughly the same dimensions as the hidden room discovered at Westfield Shopping Center. Similar voids were detected at 2 other Meridian-designed malls, both sites where teenagers had vanished in the 1980s. Webb was preparing to obtain excavation permits when he received a call that changed everything. The caller identified himself as Dr. James Morrison, a former researcher with the Brookhaven Research Initiative. Morrison claimed he'd been following news coverage of the Jessica Martinez case and needed to speak with investigators immediately. He agreed to meet Agent Reeves at a diner in Springfield, Illinois, exactly halfway between Chicago and St. Louis. Morrison arrived 20 minutes late, a nervous man in his 60s who kept glancing over his shoulder as if expecting to be followed. He ordered black coffee and spoke in whispers, even though the diner was nearly empty. "I helped design the original experiments in 1971, Morrison began, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise of the restaurant. "We were studying temporal displacement theory, the possibility that consciousness could exist in multiple time streams simultaneously. The Department of Defense was interested in military applications, ways to gather intelligence by positioning operatives in parallel temporal locations." Agent Reeves remained skeptical, but Morrison's knowledge of classified details about the missing teenagers convinced her to listen. He described the mirror configurations with perfect accuracy, explained the significance of the fountain placements, and provided technical specifications that hadn't been included in any public reports. "The mirrors create what we called a temporal anchor point," Morrison continued. "When positioned correctly and activated by specific electromagnetic frequencies, they can create a bridge between parallel time streams. The subjects experience consciousness in multiple locations simultaneously, but their physical bodies become trapped in a space that exists between normal reality." Morrison explained that the original experiments had been conducted on volunteer military personnel, but the results were catastrophic. Test subjects became lost in temporal loops, unable to return to their original time stream. The project was officially terminated in 1973, but Morrison suspected that someone had continued the research using unwitting civilian subjects. "The teenagers aren't randomly selected," Morrison revealed. "They're chosen because adolescent brains are more adaptable to temporal displacement. The electromagnetic signatures generated by developing neural pathways make them ideal subjects for consciousness transfer experiments." Agent Reeves pressed Morrison for more details about who might be continuing the experiments, but his answers were frustratingly vague. He mentioned a researcher named Dr. Catherine Wells, who had refused to abandon the project when it was officially terminated, but he claimed he'd lost contact with her decades ago. "Dr. Wells believed she could perfect the process," Morrison explained. "She thought the temporal displacement could be controlled, used to transport consciousness across vast distances instantaneously. But the subjects never returned unchanged. Those who survived the process were fundamentally altered, existing partially in multiple time streams simultaneously." Morrison produced a manila envelope containing photographs and documents he claimed to have stolen from the project files before they were destroyed. The photographs showed experimental chambers identical to the hidden room discovered at Westfield, complete with mirrors positioned at precise angles and electromagnetic field generators hidden within the walls. One document particularly caught Agent Reeves's attention. It was a personnel file for Dr. Catherine Wells, including a photograph from 1972. The woman in the picture was young, perhaps in her 30s, with sharp features and intense eyes. But what made Agent Reeves's blood run cold was the striking resemblance between Dr. Wells and the person Jessica Martinez had been seen talking to on the Brookfield Mall surveillance footage. Dr. Wells would be in her 80s by now, Agent Reeves pointed out, studying the photograph. Morrison's expression grew grim. "One of the side effects of prolonged exposure to temporal displacement fields is dramatically slowed aging. Dr. Wells was one of the first researchers to experiment on herself. She's probably appeared the same age for the past 30 years. The meeting concluded with Morrison providing Agent Reeves a list of locations where he suspected active temporal displacement chambers might still be operating. The list included shopping malls in 12 states, all designed or renovated by companies with connections to the original Brookhaven Research Initiative. Back in Ohio, Detective Webb was pursuing his own investigation into the underground chambers. He'd convinced the Brookfield Mall management to allow limited excavation beneath their fountain, claiming it was necessary to investigate potential structural damage. What the construction crew discovered defied everything Webb thought he knew about architecture and physics. The chamber beneath Brookfield Mall was larger than the ground-penetrating radar had indicated, stretching in directions that shouldn't have been possible given the building's foundation. The walls were lined with mirrors identical to those found at Westfield, but these mirrors were still active, humming with barely audible electromagnetic energy. In the center of the chamber sat 17 chairs arranged in a perfect circle. Each chair was equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment that looked decades ahead of anything available in 1996. Banks of computers lined the walls, their screens displaying data streams that meant nothing to Webb but suggested continuous monitoring of unknown subjects. But the most disturbing discovery was what appeared to be a viewing area elevated above the chamber floor. Through reinforced glass windows, observers could watch whatever experiments were being conducted on the subjects in the chairs below. The viewing area contained notebooks filled with observations written in multiple handwritings, documenting reactions and behaviors of unnamed test subjects over a span of decades. Webb photographed everything before the FBI arrived to secure the scene. The notebooks revealed a pattern of systematic experimentation on teenagers who matched the profiles of the 17 known disappearances. The observers had documented the subjects' responses to temporal displacement, noting which individuals adapted to existing in multiple time streams and which ones suffered complete psychological breaks. One notebook entry, dated November 20th, 1996, described a subject identified only as Subject 17, who had demonstrated remarkable stability during temporal displacement. The description matched Jessica Martinez perfectly, including her theater background and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Subject 17 shows exceptional adaptation to multi-temporal consciousness, the entry read. Unlike previous subjects, she maintains coherent memory across time streams and can communicate effectively from parallel locations. Recommend extended observation to determine long-term viability for permanent displacement protocol. Agent Reeves arrived at Brookfield Mall within hours of Webb's discovery. The FBI immediately classified the underground chamber as a federal crime scene and began processing evidence that would take months to fully analyze. But Reeves was most interested in the computer systems, which appeared to be monitoring active signals from multiple locations. The computer data revealed something that sent shockwaves through the investigation. The temporal displacement chambers weren't just scattered randomly across shopping malls. They were part of a coordinated network, with the Brookfield location serving as a central monitoring station for experiments being conducted simultaneously at dozens of sites across the United States. Real-time data streams showed active chambers in Phoenix, Denver, Atlanta, and 14 other cities. Each location was monitoring between 1 and 5 subjects, identified only by numbers and basic demographic information. The data suggested that somewhere in America, dozens of missing teenagers were trapped in temporal displacement chambers, existing in a state between multiple realities. Dr. Patricia Hoffman was brought in to analyze the computer systems and decode the data streams. What she found challenged everything investigators thought they knew about the scope of the experiments. This isn't just about 17 missing teenagers, Dr. Hoffman explained to the task force assembled in the Brookfield Mall security office. The network has been active continuously since 1973, with new subjects being added regularly. Based on the data patterns, I estimate there are currently 43 active subjects trapped in temporal displacement chambers across the country. The revelation that dozens of missing teenagers might still be alive, trapped in impossible spaces between realities, transformed the investigation from a cold case review into an active rescue operation. But the technical challenges were overwhelming. Without understanding how the temporal displacement technology worked, investigators had no way to safely extract the subjects without potentially killing them. Agent Reeves contacted Dr. Morrison again, hoping his knowledge of the original experiments might provide insight into safely reversing the temporal displacement process. Morrison agreed to serve as a technical consultant, but he warned that attempting to shut down the chambers without proper procedures could have catastrophic consequences. The subject's consciousness exists in a delicate balance between multiple time streams, Morrison explained during a secure video conference with the task force. Abruptly, severing those connections could cause complete psychological collapse or even death. We need to find Dr. Wells. She's the only one who fully understands the displacement protocols. The search for Dr. Catherine Wells became the FBI's top priority. Using facial recognition software, investigators began analyzing surveillance footage from shopping malls across the country, looking for a woman who appeared to be in her 30s but was actually in her 80s. The search parameters were expanded to include airports, hotels, and rental car agencies in cities where active temporal displacement chambers had been identified. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Elena Martinez, Jessica's mother, had never stopped searching for her daughter. Despite 28 years of dead ends and false hopes, Elena continued to visit shopping malls across the Midwest, distributing missing person flyers and asking questions that most people preferred not to answer. 2 weeks after the discovery of the underground chamber, Elena called Detective Webb with information that made him drop his coffee mug. "I found her," Elena said, her voice shaking with excitement and terror. "I found the woman Jessica was talking to. She's at Northgate Mall in Phoenix, and she looks exactly the same as she did in 1996. Webb and Agent Reeves were on a plane to Phoenix within 6 hours. Elena Martinez insisted on accompanying them, despite the potential dangers. She'd waited 28 years for answers about her daughter's disappearance, and nothing was going to prevent her from confronting the person responsible." Northgate Mall in Phoenix was one of the locations on Dr. Morrison's list of suspected active chambers. The mall had undergone major renovations in 1994, just 2 years before Jessica's disappearance, and several teenagers had gone missing from the area over the past decade. Local police had investigated the disappearances, but found no connections between the cases. Elena Martinez positioned herself near the fountain at the center of the mall, the same type of fountain that had been present at every disappearance site. Webb and Agent Reeves maintained surveillance from discrete locations throughout the mall, waiting for any sign of the woman Elena claimed to have spotted. At 3:47 p.m., exactly the same time Jessica had been recorded checking her watch 28 years earlier, Dr. Catherine Wells emerged from a service corridor marked "Employees Only." She looked exactly as she had in the 1972 personnel photograph, appearing to be a woman in her 30s, despite being chronologically in her 80s. Dr. Wells walked directly toward the fountain, her movements purposeful and confident. She carried a small device that looked like a modified tablet computer, occasionally glancing at its screen as she moved through the mall. When she reached the fountain, she paused and looked directly at Elena Martinez. The recognition was mutual. Eleanor stood up slowly, her hands trembling as she faced the woman who had destroyed her family 28 years earlier. Dr. Wells showed no emotion, studying Eleanor with the detached interest of a scientist observing an experiment. "Mrs. Martinez," Dr. Wells said, her voice calm and measured, "I wondered when you might find me. Your persistence has been quite remarkable." Eleanor struggled to find her voice, overwhelmed by rage and grief, and the surreal experience of confronting someone who should have aged nearly 3 decades, but looked identical to surveillance footage from 1996. "Where is my daughter?" Elena demanded, her voice carrying across the mall's central court. "What did you do to Jessica?" Dr. Wells glanced around the mall, noting the presence of Webb and Agent Reeves, despite their attempts at concealment. She seemed amused rather than concerned about being discovered. "Your daughter is exactly where she's always been," Dr. Wells replied. "She exists in the space between moments, experiencing every possibility simultaneously. She's more alive now than she ever was in your limited single-time stream reality. Elena Martinez lunged forward, but Agent Reeves intercepted her before she could reach Dr. Wells. The scientist watched the emotional display with clinical detachment, making notes on her tablet device. "I know you've found some of our research facilities," Dr. Wells continued, addressing Agent Reeves directly. "You think you understand what we've accomplished, but you're seeing only the smallest fraction of our work. The temporal displacement network spans dimensions you can't even imagine." Webb activated his radio to call for backup, but Dr. Wells raised her hand in a gesture that somehow caused all electronic devices within 50 feet to cease functioning. Cell phones went dead, radios fell silent, and even the mall's background music stopped playing. "Your technology operates within the constraints of linear time," Dr. Wells explained. "Ours transcends those limitations. We've given these children the gift of infinite possibility, freed them from the prison of sequential existence." Elena Martinez broke free from Agent Reeves's restraining grip and confronted Dr. Wells directly. "You stole my daughter from me. You destroyed my family. I want her back." Dr. Wells studied Elena with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Martinez, your daughter chose to transcend her original timeline. She adapted to multi-dimensional existence better than any previous subject. She's become something far more magnificent than the 17-year-old girl who worried about theater auditions and college applications." The conversation was interrupted by a sound that made everyone in the mall freeze. From somewhere deep within the building came the voice of a teenage girl, echoing through the corridors with impossible clarity. "Mom!" It was Jessica Martinez, calling for her mother across 28 years and multiple dimensions of reality. Elena's knees buckled as she recognized her daughter's voice, unchanged by the decades that had passed since their last conversation. "Mom, I can see you. I'm here, but I'm also everywhere else. It's beautiful and terrible, and I want to come home, but I don't know how to find the door." Dr. Wells smiled as she watched Elena Martinez crumble under the weight of hearing her daughter's voice. The scientist activated something on her tablet, and Jessica's voice grew stronger, more present. "The mirrors show me everything, Mom. I can see you crying at my grave, but there is no grave because I never died. I can see you searching for me in shopping malls across the country. I've been trying to reach you, but the signals only work at specific times in specific places." Agent Reeves realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in missing persons investigations. Jessica Martinez was somehow communicating across dimensional barriers, speaking to her mother through the temporal displacement network that had trapped her for nearly 3 decades. But the reunion was about to take a turn that would haunt investigators for years to come. Dr. Wells tapped her tablet, and suddenly the mall's architecture began to shift in ways that defied physics. The mirrors positioned throughout the corridors started reflecting not the present moment, but fragments of different time periods. In one reflection, Eleanor could see herself as a young mother, braiding Jessica's hair before her first day of kindergarten. In another, she glimpsed an older version of herself, grey-haired and bent with grief, still searching shopping malls decades in the future. "The temporal anchors are fully activated now," Dr. Wells explained, her voice taking on the tone of a professor delivering a lecture. "What you're experiencing is multidimensional reality convergence. Every moment that has ever existed, or will exist, is happening simultaneously in this space." Detective Webb tried to radio for backup again, but his equipment remained dead. Worse, the mall around them was becoming increasingly unstable. Shoppers who had been walking through the corridors moments before were now frozen in place like mannequins, caught between temporal states. Some flickered in and out of existence, while others appeared to be aging rapidly or growing younger as conflicting time streams battled for dominance. Jessica's voice grew stronger, more desperate. "Mom, I can see all the other kids. Tommy Richardson is here, and Mary Catherine Walsh. There are so many of us, trapped between the mirrors. Dr. Wells promised we'd be able to go home once the experiment was complete, but it's never complete. It just keeps expanding. Elena Martinez stepped toward the nearest mirror, her reflection showing dozens of different versions of herself from across multiple timelines. In some reflections, she was holding a baby Jessica. In others, she was an old woman attending her daughter's wedding. But in most of them, she was exactly as she appeared now, searching endlessly for a child who existed everywhere and nowhere. The network requires constant expansion to remain stable, Dr. Wells continued, seemingly oblivious to the chaos she was creating. Each new subject provides additional anchor points across the temporal spectrum. Your daughter has become one of our most successful bridges between realities. Agent Reeves had been quietly studying the patterns in the mirror reflections, trying to understand the logic behind Dr. Wells's technology. She noticed that certain mirrors showed the same scenes repeatedly, as if they were locked onto specific temporal coordinates. More importantly, she realized that Dr. Wells herself appeared differently in each reflection, sometimes as the young researcher from 1972, sometimes as an elderly woman, and occasionally as something that wasn't quite human at all. "You're trapped in this system too, aren't you?" Agent Reeves called out. "The temporal displacement didn't just slow your aging, it fractured your existence across multiple time streams. You're not fully present in any single reality." Dr. Wells's composed expression flickered for the first time, revealing something that might have been pain or longing. "The research required sacrifices," she admitted, "but the knowledge we've gained transcends individual concerns. We've unlocked the fundamental nature of existence itself." The mall continued to deteriorate around them. Storefronts were now displaying merchandise from different decades simultaneously. The Radio Shack that Webb had noticed earlier was now selling both 1990s electronics and devices that wouldn't be invented for decades. The food court flickered between different configurations, sometimes showing restaurants that had closed years ago, other times revealing dining options that existed only in parallel timelines. Jessica's voice cut through the temporal chaos. "Mum, the other kids are scared. Some of them have been here so long they've forgotten their real names. Dr. Wells keeps telling us we're helping humanity evolve, but I think she's just afraid to die. She uses us to stay alive across all these different realities." Elena turned to confront Dr. Wells directly, her maternal fury overcoming her fear of the impossible situation surrounding them. "How do I get her back? How do I bring my daughter home?" Dr. Wells consulted her tablet, scrolling through data streams that showed the status of temporal displacement subjects across the entire network. "Mrs. Martinez, your daughter exists in 47 different time streams simultaneously. Her consciousness is distributed across multiple dimensions of reality. To extract her from the network would require collapsing those connections, and the shock might destroy her entirely." "Then why are you telling me this?" Elena demanded. "Why reveal yourself if there's nothing I can do?" Dr. Wells looked up from her device, and for the first time, her expression showed genuine emotion. "Because the network is failing, Mrs. Martinez. After 50 years of operation, the temporal anchors are becoming unstable. The subjects are beginning to merge with each other, losing their individual identities. Soon, there will be nothing left but a collective consciousness trapped between realities." Detective Webb had been examining the mirrors more closely, noticing that some of them were cracking under the strain of maintaining multiple temporal connections. "What happens when the network collapses?" he asked. "The accumulated temporal energy will be released all at once," Dr. Wells explained. "Every moment that has been artificially sustained will snap back to its proper timeline. The subjects will be returned to their original points of displacement, but they'll carry with them the memories and experiences of existing in multiple realities simultaneously." Agent Reeves realized the implications immediately. "You're talking about 43 missing persons suddenly reappearing at shopping malls across the country, all of them psychologically traumatized by decades of existing between dimensions. Some of them have been missing for over 50 years. Their families are dead. Their entire world has changed." Dr. Wells nodded grimly. "Which is why I've been working to find a controlled solution. The network collapse is inevitable, but perhaps we can manage the process to minimize the psychological damage to the subjects. Elena Martinez had been listening to this technical discussion while staring into the mirrors, watching her daughter exist across multiple timelines simultaneously. In one reflection, Jessica was still 17, trapped in the underground chamber. In another, she appeared to be in her 30s, somehow aged by her temporal displacement experience. But in most of the reflections, Jessica looked exactly as she had on the day she disappeared, frozen at the moment of her transition between realities. "I don't care about your network or your experiments," Elena said firmly. "I want my daughter back, and I want those other children returned to their families, whatever the consequences." Dr. Wells studied Elena with renewed interest. "Mrs. Martinez, you don't understand the forces we're dealing with. The temporal displacement technology operates on principles that transcend normal physics. A controlled collapse would take months of preparation. An uncontrolled collapse could tear holes in reality itself." But Elena Martinez had spent 28 years learning to be stronger than her circumstances. She'd survived the initial devastation of Jessica's disappearance, the years of false hope and dead-end investigations, the slow process of learning to live with unanswered questions. She wasn't going to be intimidated by a scientist who looked young enough to be her daughter, but claimed to be older than her mother. "Then we'd better start preparing," Elena said, "because I'm not leaving this mall without my daughter." The determination in Elena's voice seemed to resonate through the temporal network. The mirrors began reflecting a new set of images, showing not just the missing teenagers trapped between realities, but their families as well. Parents who had never stopped searching, siblings who had grown up in the shadow of unexplained disappearances, communities that had been forever changed by the loss of their children. Jessica's voice returned, stronger than before. "Mum, I can feel the network changing. The other kids, we're starting to remember who we were before this happened. Tommy Richardson just told me about his little sister's birthday party. Mary Catherine is crying because she can see her parents at her high school graduation, waiting for her to walk across the stage." Dr. Wells began typing rapidly on her tablet, monitoring system alerts that were cascading across her screen. "The emotional resonance is destabilizing the temporal anchors," she muttered. "The subjects are beginning to reassert their original identities instead of accepting their multidimensional existence." Agent Reeves realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. The missing teenagers weren't just victims of Dr. Wells's experiments. They were actively fighting back against their imprisonment. The strength of their desire to return home was literally breaking down the barriers between realities. "How long do we have?" Webb asked, noting that the mall around them was becoming increasingly chaotic. Shoppers from different time periods were now occupying the same space, creating a crowded confusion of people from across 5 decades of the mall's existence. Dr. Wells consulted her readings, her expression growing more concerned. "At the current rate of degradation, complete network collapse will occur within 6 hours. But the process is accelerating. The emotional feedback from the subjects is creating resonance patterns I've never seen before." Elena Martinez stepped closer to the largest mirror, placing her palm against its surface. The glass was warm, pulsing with energy that seemed to respond to her touch. In the reflection, she could see Jessica reaching toward her from the other side, their hands almost touching across the dimensional barrier. "Jessica, baby, can you hear me clearly?" "Yes, Mom. Better than I have in years. The barriers are getting thinner. I can almost feel your hand." Dr. Wells moved to intercept Elena, but Detective Webb blocked her path. "Let her try," he said firmly. "These families have waited decades for answers. Maybe the solution isn't in your technology. Maybe it's in something simpler." "You don't understand," Dr. Wells protested. "Uncontrolled temporal displacement could..." "Could what?" Agent Reeves interrupted. "Reunite children with their families? End 50 years of illegal experimentation on minors? Sounds like exactly what needs to happen." The mirrors throughout the mall were now showing the same scene from multiple angles. Elena Martinez reaching toward her daughter across dimensional boundaries, with dozens of other missing teenagers visible in the background, all pressing against the barriers that separated them from their families and their normal lives. Dr. Morrison's voice suddenly crackled through Webb's radio, the device mysteriously functioning again, despite the electromagnetic interference. "Detective Webb, this is Dr. Morrison. I'm monitoring the temporal readings from the Phoenix location. The network is approaching critical cascade failure. You need to evacuate the area immediately." Dr. Wells heard Morrison's transmission and laughed bitterly. James Morrison, still trying to control forces he helped create but never understood. "The cascade failure isn't something to be avoided, Detective. It's the only way to free the subjects from the network." Elena Martinez had been listening to the technical discussion, but her focus remained entirely on the mirror, where Jessica's image was becoming clearer and more solid with each passing moment. "I don't care about your scientific theories," she said. "I'm bringing my daughter home." With determination that surprised even herself, Eleanor pushed her hand against the mirror's surface. Instead of meeting solid glass, her fingers passed through as if the mirror were made of water. The sensation was cold and electric, like touching a live wire made of liquid mercury. "Mom!" Jessica's voice was no longer coming from speakers or dimensional echoes. She was right there, on the other side of the mirror, reaching through the dimensional barrier to grasp her mother's hand. The moment their fingers touched, every mirror in Northgate Mall exploded simultaneously. The sound was deafening, like thunder and breaking glass, and the screams of 43 missing teenagers all happening at once. But instead of sharp fragments cutting everyone in the mall, the shattered mirrors dissolved into sparkles of light that danced through the air like snow made of stars. Elena Martinez found herself holding her daughter's hand, but Jessica wasn't 17 anymore. She appeared to be in her 20s, aged by her experiences existing across multiple timelines, but unmistakably the same person who had disappeared from Brookfield Mall 28 years earlier. "Mom," Jessica said, her voice hoarse from decades of calling across dimensional barriers. "I'm so sorry I've been gone so long. There was so much I wanted to tell you, but the time streams kept getting tangled." Around them, the mall was filling with teenagers and young adults who hadn't been there moments before. Tommy Richardson, now appearing to be in his 30s, despite disappearing as a 16-year-old in 1973. Mary Catherine Walsh, aged to her mid-20s, but carrying the emotional weight of someone who had experienced 50 years of existence between realities. All 43 subjects were materializing simultaneously, returned to normal space-time, but bearing the marks of their impossible journey. Dr. Wells stood in the center of the chaos, her tablet device sparking and smoking as the temporal displacement network collapsed completely. For the first time since 1972, she appeared to be aging normally, the artificial youth sustained by her multi-dimensional existence finally catching up with her. Her hair was turning grey as Elena watched, wrinkles appearing on her face as decades of postponed time reasserted itself. "The network," Dr. Wells whispered, staring at her failing equipment. 50 years of research, destroyed by simple human emotion. Agent Reeves was on her radio, calling for medical teams and crisis counselors to respond to Northgate Mall. The logistics of dealing with 43 people who had been missing for decades were staggering, but that was a problem for later. Right now, families were being reunited with children they thought they'd never see again. Detective Webb was documenting everything with his camera, knowing that no one would believe this story without extensive evidence. The temporal displacement chambers in shopping malls across the country were simultaneously collapsing as the network shut down, and FBI teams were already en route to secure the sites and process whatever evidence remained. But Elena Martinez wasn't thinking about evidence or investigations or the broader implications of what had just happened. She was holding her daughter, feeling Jessica's heartbeat and breathing in the scent of her hair, and trying to process the miracle of having her child returned after nearly 3 decades of loss. "I never stopped looking for you," Elena whispered. "Every day for 28 years. I never stopped believing you were alive somewhere." Jessica pulled back to look at her mother's face, studying the changes that 2 decades had made. "I could see you sometimes, through the mirrors. I watched you searching for me, and I tried so hard to reach through and touch you. The other kids, we all tried to get messages to our families, but Dr. Wells said the temporal barriers were too strong." Around them, similar reunions were taking place throughout the mall. Parents who had received emergency calls from the FBI were arriving to find children who had disappeared when they were teenagers, but were now adults, carrying memories of existing in spaces between time where they had watched their families age and grieve and continue living without them. Dr. Catherine Wells was sitting on a bench near the fountain, looking older with each passing minute as the temporal displacement effects fully reversed. Agent Reeves approached her carefully, noting that the scientist appeared to be experiencing the psychological shock of returning to linear time after existing in multiple realities simultaneously. "Dr. Wells, you're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and conducting illegal experiments on minors," Agent Reeves said, producing handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." Dr. Wells looked up with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of 50 years of accumulated knowledge and regret. "Agent Reeves, I know you think I'm a monster, but those children experienced wonders beyond imagination. They saw the true nature of reality, understood the universe in ways that linear time humans never could." "They were prisoners," Agent Reeves replied firmly. "Children stolen from their families and trapped in your experiments. Whatever scientific knowledge you gained doesn't justify the suffering you caused." As the handcuffs clicked into place, Dr. Wells seemed to shrink further into herself. The temporal displacement technology that had kept her young and powerful for decades was gone, leaving behind an elderly woman who would spend whatever remained of her life in federal prison. Elena Martinez wasn't paying attention to the arrest. She was walking through the mall with Jessica, introducing her daughter to a world that had changed dramatically during her absence. Cell phones, the internet, social media, streaming video, technologies that hadn't existed when Jessica disappeared, were now integral parts of daily life. "The hardest part," Jessica explained as they sat in the food court, "was watching the world move forward without me. I could see through the mirrors that you got older, that fashions changed, that new music came out. But I was stuck at 17, unable to participate in any of it." Elena reached across the table to hold her daughter's hand, still amazed by the solid reality of Jessica's presence. "We'll figure it out together," she promised. "I don't care how long it takes or how difficult the adjustment is. I have you back, and that's all that matters." But even as families were being reunited and missing persons cases were finally being closed, investigators were beginning to understand the full scope of what Dr. Wells had created. The temporal displacement network hadn't just affected the 43 primary subjects. FBI teams examining the collapsed chambers were finding evidence of hundreds of other individuals who had been briefly exposed to the technology. Mall employees, security guards, shoppers who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Dr. Morrison was coordinating the scientific response from a command center established at the FBI field office in Phoenix. His preliminary analysis suggested that the network collapse had created temporal echoes that would affect thousands of people across the United States. Some might experience vivid dreams of alternate realities. Others could develop the ability to sense temporal disturbances. A few might even retain limited access to multidimensional perception. "This isn't over," Morrison warned Agent Reeves during a secure phone call. "Doctor, Wells' network was connected to the fundamental structure of space-time. Its collapse will have consequences we won't fully understand for years. But those were problems for tomorrow. Today was about reunions and healing, and the simple miracle of families being made whole again after decades of separation." Elena Martinez drove home from Phoenix with Jessica in the passenger seat, both of them crying and laughing and talking constantly as they tried to bridge 28 years of separation. Jessica's bedroom was exactly as she had left it, preserved like a shrine to Elena's faith that her daughter would someday return. "I used to dream about coming home," Jessica said, as she sat on her childhood bed, surrounded by posters of actors who were now middle-aged and books she had been reading in high school. "But I never imagined it would feel so strange and wonderful at the same time." Elena sat beside her daughter, still unable to fully believe that Jessica was really there. "We have time now," she said softly. "All the time in the world to figure out what comes next." Outside, the sun was setting over a world that had been fundamentally changed by the collapse of Dr. Wells's temporal displacement network. 43 families were beginning the complex process of rebuilding relationships with children who had been lost for decades. FBI investigators were working to understand technology that shouldn't have been possible. And in shopping malls across the country, maintenance crews were cleaning up the shattered remains of mirrors that had once served as windows between realities. The Jessica Martinez case was officially closed, but its implications would ripple through law enforcement, scientific research, and dozens of families for generations to come. Some mysteries, once solved, create even bigger questions about the nature of reality itself. As Eleanor tucked her daughter into bed for the first time in 28 years, Jessica smiled and said, "Mum, I love you, and tomorrow I want to hear about everything I missed." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead and whispered, "Tomorrow, and every day after that, for as long as you want to listen." The house on Maple Street was finally complete again, but across the country, investigators were just beginning to understand the true scope of what they had uncovered. The aftermath of the temporal displacement network collapse sent shockwaves through federal agencies that most Americans didn't even know existed. Deep within the bowels of the Pentagon, classified briefings were being conducted about the implications of Dr. Wells's technology. If one rogue scientist could create a network spanning decades and multiple states, what other impossible technologies might be operating in secret? Agent Diana Reeves found herself at the center of a new task force designated only as Project Temporal. Her superiors wanted answers about how many other networks might still be active, how many missing persons cases from the past 50 years might actually be connected to similar experiments, and most importantly, whether foreign governments had developed their own versions of temporal displacement technology. The evidence recovered from the collapsed chambers painted a disturbing picture. Dr. Wells hadn't been working alone. Financial records hidden in encrypted files showed funding from multiple sources, including defense contractors, private research foundations, and what appeared to be international shell companies. The Brookhaven Research Initiative had been just the tip of an iceberg that stretched far deeper than anyone had imagined. Dr. James Morrison was proving invaluable as a consultant, but his knowledge only covered the early years of the project. According to his briefings, the original temporal displacement experiments had been terminated in 1973, specifically because they were producing results that frightened even the military researchers who had commissioned them. "We created doorways," Morrison explained during a classified session at Quantico, "not just between different points in time, but between different versions of reality itself. Some of the test subjects came back changed in ways we couldn't understand. They spoke about seeing alternate versions of themselves, versions where different choices had been made, different paths taken." Agent Sarah Kim, Morrison's new partner on the task force, had been studying the psychological profiles of the returned subjects. What she discovered was even more unsettling than their physical displacement. Many of the teenagers showed signs of what psychologists were calling temporal dissociation disorder, a condition that didn't exist in any medical textbook because it had never been possible before. "They remember living multiple lives simultaneously," Dr. Kim explained to the task force. "Jessica Martinez can recall conversations with her mother that happened in timelines where she never disappeared. Tommy Richardson has memories of graduating high school, going to college, getting married, and having children, even though he was trapped in the displacement chamber for 50 years. The implications were staggering. If the returned subjects retained memories from alternate realities, They might possess knowledge of events that had never actually occurred in the primary timeline. Some of them were describing technological innovations that didn't exist yet, historical events that had unfolded differently, even personal relationships with people they had never actually met. Detective Marcus Webb had been promoted to liaison between local law enforcement and the federal task force, but his focus remained on the practical aspects of the investigation. 43 people had been returned to a world they no longer recognized, and each one needed extensive support to readjust to normal life. The challenges were unprecedented. Mary Catherine Walsh, who had disappeared in 1981 at age 16, now appeared to be 25, but had the social development of someone who had been isolated for 4 decades. Her parents were in their 70s, and her younger brother was now older than she appeared to be. The family dynamics were so complex that the FBI had assigned a full-time counselor just to help them navigate the reunion process. The Jessica Martinez case officially closed on December 3, 2024, but the questions it raised will haunt investigators for decades to come. 43 families were reunited with children who had aged in impossible ways, carrying memories of realities that shouldn't exist. Dr. Catherine Wells died in federal custody 6 months after her arrest, taking most of her secrets with her. But somewhere in America, in shopping malls designed with mirrors positioned at precise angles, maintenance crews still report strange electromagnetic readings near the fountains. Elena Martinez keeps Jessica's childhood bedroom exactly as it was, not as a shrine to loss anymore, but as a reminder that some mysteries, once solved, reveal truths more incredible than the questions they answered. The mirrors are gone, but the echoes remain.